Good morning, respected guest, Mr. Tushar Gandhi, our head of school, Mr. Kais, coordinators, teachers, and my dear friends.
Today, we celebrate a day for India's greatest visionary, philosopher, and the person because of whom we are free and not under the British rule.
We at PODAR-ORT are privileged to celebrate Gandhi Jayanti with Mr. Tushar Gandhi, great-grandson of Mr. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi.
Now, we have a video on the bhajan Vaishnava Janto, compiled by Mr. Sandeep Thapa. This bhajan was written in the 15th century by the poet Narsin Mehta in Gujarati. The poem speaks about the life, ideals, and mentality of a Vaishnava Jana, a follower of Vaishnavism.
वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराए जाने रे। वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराए जाने रे। पर दुखे उपकार करे तो ये मन अभिमान ना आने रे। वैष्णव जन को तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराए जाने सकल लोक सहुने वंदे निंदा न करे केनी रे। काच काच मन निश्चल राखे धन धन जननी तेनी रे। वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराए जाने
Thank you, sir, for that amazing video. Now, we have a dance medley compiled and presented by Yu Hinger and Mr. Sandeep Thapa.
गुजरने वाली हवा बता मेरा इतना काम करेगी क्या। मेरे गाँव जा मेरे दोस्तों को सलाम दे। ऐ मेरी ज़मीं महबूब मेरी नस नस में तेरा इश्क भर। फीका ना पड़े कभी रंग तेरा जिस्मों से निकल के खून करे। है मेरी ज़मीं अफसोस नहीं जो मेरे लिए सौ दर्द सही। महफूज रहे तेरे आन सदा चाहे जान मेरी ये रहे ना रहे। तेरी मिट्टी में मिल जाऊं गुल बन के मैं खिल जाऊं। इतनी सी है दिल की हर से भारत भूमि दुनिया की शान है। भारत माँ के चरणों में जीवन कुर्बान है। भारत हमको जान से प्यारा है। जहाँ डाल डाल पर सोने की चिड़िया करती है बसेरा, वो भारत देश है मेरा, वो भारत देश है मेरा। जहाँ सत्य अहिंसा और धर्म का पग पग लगता डेरा, वो भारत देश है मेरा, वो भारत देश है मेरा। देश मेरे मेरी जान है तू। देश मेरे मेरी जान है तू। देश मेरे मेरी जान है तू। देश मेरी जान है तू। तेरी मिट्टी में मिल जाऊं बढ़ के मैं खिल जाऊं, इतनी सी है दिल की आरज़ू। तेरी नदियों में बह जाऊं, तेरे खेतों में लहराऊं, इतनी सी है दिल की आरज़ू।
Thank you, Yuva and Mr. Sandeep, for compiling this patriotic video. Now, Harshvardhan will give us an insight into who Mr. Tushar Gandhi is.
Mr. Tushar Gandhi is the board member of the Gandhi Trust. He's also an established actor who acted in the film Hey Ram. He writes too. He's responsible for recreating history by performing the Dandi March on its 75th anniversary. Mr. Tushar Gandhi has graced us with his presence despite having a busy schedule and has come to talk to us about Gandhiji's principles and how we are stuck in a similar void today for a fight from the coronavirus. I would request everybody to listen to this talk very carefully, as there will be a Q&A session at the end of this talk. We request you to please mute your device. Now, I request Mr. Gandhi to take the screen.
Thank you so very much. Thank you for this beautiful presentation that you have all put together today, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to you and share my thoughts with all of you. In the beginning, I would like to tell you that I am a person who has just been very fortunate to be born into the family of a great person. It doesn't mean that I have any of those qualities within me, because greatness cannot be inherited. It has to be earned through one's own actions. And I believe that I have yet to go far. So I'm very privileged to be with all of you, and it always gives me great pleasure to be able to speak with young people and to be able to attempt to instill some ideals, some thoughts in the young minds, because they are the most receptive, inquisitive and receptive minds. And so I wish that after I finish speaking, you will let your curiosity free and ask questions. Before I begin on the subject assigned to me today, I'd just like to point out one thing, that Vaishnava Jan is a bhajan written about the virtues, but it should not be interpreted as a bhajan written about an ideal, a person of a community.
Yes.
Can we have everybody on mute, please? Because it's very distracting if I hear sounds in the background. I'm sorry.
Sir, I think you need to be a little louder, Mr. Tushar.
Yeah, I'll be louder.
Yes, that's much better.
Yeah. Out on what I was saying initially. Okay. Okay, I'm muted now, so I have to unmute myself.
No, sir, you're audible. You're audible.
I am
You're
audible.
not.
Okay, fine.
Yes.
So I was saying that I'm a person who's very fortunate to be born in a family or having an ancestor who was great. But greatness is not something that one can inherit. Greatness has to be earned from one's own actions and deeds. And so I very much am aware of the fact that I need to achieve much more before I can be considered to be a worthwhile descendant of Bapu. But thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk to all of you, because I believe that young minds are receptive minds, and I always prefer to speak to the young and try and instill some of the ideas in those minds. Your minds are also very curious, so I look forward to your questions at the end of my talk. Before I start on the subject assigned to me, I just like to make or explain one thing, that Vaishnavajan, although it talks about Vaishnavas or the qualities of Vaishnavas, in today's time we have to interpret it as being the definition of an ideal human being. Removed from all caste, community, and gender identities, but a song or a bhajan that lists the ideal qualities of a human being, because that is what is much more relevant. Caste and community identities are really very inhibiting identities, and so it is time when we need to come over that those restrictions of caste and community and start looking at each other as human beings and respecting each other as human beings. We're always going to be different. No two people can be identical together, whether in looks or in habits or nature. Even in a family, even among siblings, we have our distinctive characteristics which are different from one another. And we can only live together in harmony and with love if we learn to appreciate our differences. And out of that understanding of the need of an individual to be different, respect for one another's differences will be born. And out of that understanding and respect, we will learn to truly love one another. So that is also something that we must appreciate and understand and respect. Now, coming to the subject that was requested of me, how Gandhi would have utilized this period of enforced isolation. We have suddenly, all of a sudden, been forced to practice a whole new and very strange way of life, which is very alien to all of us, and it's traumatizing also. We are not still used to this kind of isolation and insulation from one another. Unfortunately for us, technology provides us with the ability to at least communicate with each other, but technology is also very dangerous because it is very prone to abuse. We can misuse technology, misuse its ability to communicate, misuse its ability to network. And we see in society today that by and large, the use of technology in today's circumstances is really not a productive use of technology. So we need to be very aware of that fact also, and we cannot become habituated to just this form of communication. And I see that because of the circumstances are legitimizing that use, that we are becoming more and more addicted to virtual communications than to actual communications, even when we are in close proximity with one another. Much of our communication happens through social media, which is not a healthy sign. Why do we need our smartphones when we are sitting in the same room or in the same house or same establishment as the person we are communicating with? Why can't we, at that point of time, keep technology away and have a direct, physical, actual communication with that person, which is a much more healthy communication to do. And so we must also be very aware of the fact that this situation is also dangerous in the way that it is forcing us to communicate with them. You see, the good thing of this situation is that families are insulated together. Have been given this opportunity to spend time with one another. Now, how do we spend that time with one another will decide whether we are utilizing this situation to the best, or we are succumbing to its compulsions and learning a not so healthy communications. Because I have noticed that even amongst parents, amongst families, social media communications are much more used than actual communications that we could do. And this period of insulation and isolation and social distancing has forced us to distance ourselves from everybody else but the family that lives with us in the same apartment. We have no option but to interact with, and then why not use technology in that situation and have direct communications? This situation is also forcing us into an isolation which is depressing for all age groups. At one point of time, the boredom of this isolation becomes overbearing for all of us. And we don't know what to do, and we don't still know the psychological effects of this way of life that Corona has forced on us is going to have in our abilities in the future, especially for young people who are still inculcating habits and practices in them, learning from their own experiences, learning from the situation that they are forced to be in. And so I think it is time when we must make a spatial effort. And that spatial effort can only become if we understand this situation, we understand why we are forced into this situation, and we realize how much we have contributed to creating this situation. I said that technology is a boon. I also said that technology is a curse. And this pandemic of COVID that we are so endangered by, its spread and its rapid proliferation is because of the kind of lifestyle that we had accustomed ourselves to. We become so materialistic that nothing else mattered. It becomes so self-centered that no one else mattered to us. It was our pleasure, our choices, our wants, our needs. That was all that is of concern to us. And that is where we behaved initially. We behaved very irresponsibly. Some people still behave irresponsibly. And that is where we are not able to contain or defeat this virus. It's not the first time that we have such a pandemic. In our lifetimes, it may be the first time. But the world and civilization has lived through many such pandemics. Epidemics. When we were children, in my childhood, we used to have seasonal epidemics. And when those kind of seasons, it was time for those kind of seasons, we realized the dangers and we curbed our activities so that we would not expose ourselves to those dangers and those viruses and those infections. Before my time, in Bapu's time, there were many epidemics and pandemics. And how Bapu responded to them was while taking care of himself and his near and dear ones. He realized that he had a responsibility towards society. And he utilized that time to serve society when there was the greatest need. Today, we have turned this need for isolation into an excuse to not do anything for our society. And we don't have to really become the frontline first responders in this. Small little things which would be helpful to victims of this infection can go a long way in making us a better person and serving our society better also. And Gandhi did that. In his time, Bapu did that. He served to the best of his abilities. Of course, Bapu being a very brave soul, he used to become the first responder in his times in South Africa, in England, and in India. Whenever a crisis situation occurred, he volunteered to be right there in the front line, whether it was war, whether it was an epidemic, whether it was a health crisis, whatever the crisis be, he was there serving society in the front lines, cleaning up the community, serving the afflicted, nursing the ill back to health, cleaning them, doing all the jobs that were required to be done. He and his people also went and cleaned up the dead, gave them a respectable uh, uh, last rites, ensured that rotting bodies did not add to the spread of the epidemic. All the work that was necessary at that time, he was willing to do. We don't even have to go to that extent because not all of us are capable of doing that. And when you do that kind of work, you have to be very cautious about your own personal safety. And unless you are very particular about that, it's no use doing those kind of very work that endangers. But we can do small things. You know, if in our building, in our community, there is a family that is forced to quarantine itself, there would be a lot of things that assistance that they would require. But our first instinct becomes that we shun them, stay away from them. But if we take precautions, we can still serve them to the best of abilities so that they do not feel isolated and neglected. Because in times of peril, the feeling of being neglected or shunned by people makes that perilous time become even more oppressive. And small little gestures of kindness will be remembered for the rest of their lives, and they will be grateful for that. And so, if we spread kindness, kindness will be returned to us also. And we could do that, all of us. Children could do that, adults could do that, families could do that, and make this situation less grim. During his lifetime, the biggest pandemic that swept across this globe was the Spanish flu. Bapu lost two of his family members. His eldest son's daughter, wife, and infant son were consumed by the Spanish flu. Bapu grieved for them. But once again, he jumped into the service of society and humanity and was right in the forefront of serving people and society while they were, you know, besieged by the infection of the Spanish flu. It took a long time because in those days they did not have such developed medical sciences. So it took a long time to battle with it and stop it. But because of the limitations of communications and travel and interactions, Spanish flu took a long time to spread across the globe. It did spread across the globe, but the time period was almost 3 years. And within those 3 years, while it was still infecting other parts of the globe, the cure was also found, the treatment was also found, and people were being cured. But it killed a huge number of human beings in its time. And yet, we overcame that. Humanity, which survived Spanish flu, overcame that and could continue their lives in a healthy manner. We must also prepare for the future. this pandemic, this isolation, this insulation that the pandemic has forced on us, that time could be creatively used, productively used, if we plan and prepare for the future. I'll give you an example of how Gandhi used his time of isolation and in his life in South Africa and in India. On many occasions, he was sent to prison. He was imprisoned. And most of the times, that imprisonment meant isolation, meant being kept away from society and contact. And what did Gandhi do during that time? He decided that that time was not a punishment, but it was a time for introspection and meditation. And he utilized that time to search his own self and to identify his weaknesses and the mistakes that he was committing and empower himself to overcome those mistakes, those weaknesses, and become a better person. He used that time for productive use because he believed in spinning and the charkha. He devoted more time to spin and be productive. You know, he was somebody who believed in physical endeavor very much. He believed that all of us had a duty to perform physical tasks for our own betterment because the body requires physical exercises. But today what we do, because it's fashionable, we go into the gym and do physical exercise. But think of it, if we made a community duty as a physical task, how productive we would be. And Gandhi throughout his life, as you see the image of Gandhi behind me, utilized all his free time to spin the charkha and produce the khadi yarn. And what happened at the end of it, when he collected enough, it was woven into fabric, into cloth. And he used what he spun. The yarn that he spun was woven into cloth that he used to clothe himself. Just think of it, if we were to take up the spinning of the charkha today, while we have so much time to spare in our isolation and social distancing, it is an exercise for physical coordination, because unless our actions are coordinated, you will not be able to spin a even yarn, a thread of khadi yourself. So it needs a lot of concentration. So your concentration improves. It needs focus. So your ability to drain your mind of all other thoughts and concentrate on the task you're doing becomes more acute. It also requires a meditative spirit, because if your mind is full of thoughts, you will be distracted, and that will immediately reflect on your ability to spin the thread. So it gives your mind a very sharp edge to be able to specifically perform a task. It is a very spiritual thing, because you are at peace. When inner peace happens, you become much more creative. You become much more able to do things. So it improves that also. And so it's not only just a physical activity, but it is a spiritual activity also. And in the end of it, you produce something, you create something. So the joy of production and creation is also there for you. I remember when I was in school, I was in a school that was run on Gandhian principles, and from standard 4 till we did our 11th from school, every morning in assembly for 1 hour, we had to spin the charkha. It was compulsory. All of us sat down, and while we recited the assembly prayers and things, we would be spinning the charkha. And at the end of the academic year, if all the yarn that we had spun during that whole year would be collected by the school and sent to the weavers, and along with our annual results, we would get the piece of cloth that we had produced ourselves. And the greatest joy that we had was not the percentage or marks that we scored or the grades we scored. in the result. But in comparing with our friends who had managed to produce the biggest piece of cloth, and that used to give us so much joy because we knew that every thread in that cloth was produced by us. We could take pride in showing off that. And we used to take immense, even if we just managed to spin just enough to make one handkerchief, that handkerchief used to give us so much pride to show it off and tell people, I produced this, I produced the yarn, I produced the thread to make this handkerchief. Try that. There are people who teach you how to spin the charka. And it's not something that takes you backwards in age. Because today the world is going towards organic and sustainable practices. And the production of khadi, nothing can be more organic and sustainable than that. So Bapu utilized his time in prisons to produce also. He utilized his time in prisons to write. And some of the greatest works of Bapu, which explained his ideology and his philosophy, were written while he was in isolation. His seminal work, Hind Swaraj, which is considered to be the basis of a Gandhian ideology, was written when he was isolated from humanity, traveling from England to South Africa by ship. Because those days the ship voyage used to be pretty slow and long. It took a long duration, and you were confined to your cabin. You couldn't, you were not able to interact with many people. When the seas were rough, you had to stay inside the cabin. And that 21-day voyage, Bapu utilized to write in Swaraj, which was so astute that even today when you read it, if you understand what he is trying to say, you will realize how timely it is even in this time of the coronavirus. His treatise on the Bhagavad Gita, he wrote from his imprisonment in Yavada jail in Pune. After the Salt March, when he was imprisoned over there, he utilized his time to study the Gita and then write about his understanding of the teachings and the central message of the Bhagavad Gita. This is how he used to utilize his time when he had to be isolated and he was forced to be not in direct contact with people. Many a times he was arrested and kept in prison with his Satyagrahi colleagues. And one of his long-standing relationships was with Mahadev Desai, who was his personal secretary for 25 years. And they formed a very close relationship with one another. Bapu considered Mahadev Bhai as his fifth son. And Mahadev Bhai respected Bapu because he had given up a very promising career to join Bapu and dedicate his life to the ashram and the movement for Satyagraha. But both of them were very brilliant and great scholars. And they used to enjoy debating with one another. And every day in prison, while they were engaged in spinning, they would also be talking and arguing and debating with one another. And one of their favorite topics was English grammar and the eccentricities of English grammar. And they would keep debating that. And if you read the memoirs of Sardar Patel, he mentions it in his memoirs that these people had such a capacity for such trivial discussions. In normal life, if they were wasting time that way, it would have been something to be criticized because there was so many other things that they could have done. But think of the fact that when they had nothing else to do for 24 hours of the day, spending time even on what seemed to be a trivial pursuit would enhance each other's knowledge so much, each other's appreciation, and also instill the quality of appreciating and respecting somebody else's opinion. Today, we have come to believe that debating means scoring a point over your opponent. So we are always trying to throw punchlines at one another. We don't listen to what you say. We are listening for your opponent to make a mistake. We don't appreciate what the opponent is saying, because even when our opponent wins against us, we resent that victory. We do not appreciate it, saying that today you got the better of me, but next time I'm going to be more prepared. And we never respect the knowledge and understanding and learning of our opponent. We're always jealous of their abilities, and that is not a healthy situation. So even discussions and debates, no matter how frivolous they may seem, they inculcate a quality of acceptance and tolerance within us. Having referred to the word tolerance, I do not subscribe to the ideology of tolerance at all, because I believe that tolerance is very dangerous. Because tolerance is something that tells us that it's fine to be irritated by something, it's fine to be annoyed by certain practices. But because you believe that you are tolerant, we must not react to it. But those of you who have studied physics will know that in physics, tolerance has a finite value. When the irritant becomes greater than its capacity to tolerate, then the fuse blows to avert an accident from happening. And those of you who have seen food being cooked in your homes, the pressure cooker is an inevitable part or device of cooking of that food. And it cooks faster because it utilizes the pressure of the steam that builds up within itself to cook the food inside much faster. But the pressure cooker also has a safety escape valve, because if steam builds up in a pressure cooker beyond its capacity to withstand the pressure of the steam, the pressure cooker might explode and cause a very grave accident in the kitchen. And so in creating it, they have created a safety valve, and what we have come to know as a whistle. Every kitchen where food is cooked, you hear that whistle going off when the pressure cooker is on the gas or the stove or on the cooking range. That is the limit of tolerance, even in human beings. Because we keep getting irritated and we keep telling ourselves, no, I will not respond because I'm tolerant. But one fine day, that anger that we have suppressed within ourselves explodes, gets beyond our capabilities of being able to withstand that irritation. And when that explosion occurs, we will become as destructive as an exploding pressure cooker or a short circuit that happens because the surge of current was beyond the wire's capability of containing it. And then the destruction that we cause, the damage that we cause, is much greater. And so as I began my talk by saying that we are always going to be different with one another. Even in situations, if we understand why that situation has to be something different than what we are accustomed to, then we will learn to respect it. And out of that respect, we will learn to appreciate the right of the other person to behave in a different manner than us. And then we will truly accept the differences. So acceptance is much more vital than mere tolerance. And so please believe this, please practice this. Learn, respect, appreciate, and accept our differences and our remember one thing, that everybody is going to be different and everyone has the right to be different. We cannot, humanity can never be uniform, can never be standardized to an acceptable uh, quantity by us. And so these are the lessons that we learn during these times when normal life is denied to us. We will be able to survive much better. We'll survive the infection. Those of us who are cautious, those of us who are responsible, will definitely survive the infection. And human body has the capability of resisting these kind of viruses and bacteria to a certain extent. And over time, the resistance keeps building up. So given time, we will naturally build up a resistance. What should worry us is how is this situation going to change us? Is it going to make us better than what we were before this situation was forced on us? Or is it going to make us worse than what we were before this? And we must all strive to ensure that this situation doesn't become overpowering and make us become worse than what we are at the moment. Utilize this situation. Even at times of peril, there is a boon behind it. And how we utilize that and what we gain from it is only up to us. Nobody else can make that difference. How we respond, how we react, how we utilize that situation will make the result for us that much better or that much worse. So please remember this and be inspired by these great examples of people who are as ordinary as all of us are. But today we respect them because in their lifetimes they achieved things that kept making them better. And that's why I don't refer to Bapu as the Mahatma. Because I believe that by making him a Mahatma, we have done the greatest disservice to him. Because the Mahatma we use as an excuse not to emulate him, not to attempt to become like him, and convince ourselves that he achieved all that because he was a Mahatma. And we are just mortal human beings. We don't matter. Whatever we do is not significant. But remember one thing, that in nature, every action has a significance and a consequence. And collectively, it has a much greater consequence than the individual. But the individual action also has a consequence. So never consider yourself to be insignificant. And if you learn to believe that, then you will also develop the instinct to make your significance greater. And that can only happen if you become better. Because those who are bad, they have a momentary significance, but as soon as they are removed, their influence subsides. But those who have done good, their significance is eternal. And that is why even more than 7 decades after he was murdered, we cannot be indifferent to Gandhi. We can either hate him or we can love him. But we cannot be indifferent to him at all. Even today, he becomes significant, and especially when we are faced with peril or situations that endanger us or cause us anxiety, we look towards him and try to find if he can provide us with a solution. But the solutions will only be believable if you recognize him as ordinary human being as we all are. And then he will be an example that will be much easier to follow. I'm going to end my talk with a little anecdote that I was told when I was a child by my father. And this anecdote is about what happened with my father. You know, you must all be told by your families and your teachers and everybody that anger is very bad. We must not get angry. But yet, human beings cannot avoid that feeling of being angry, irritated. But my father, my grandfather Manilal, who was the second son of Mohandas and Kastur Gandhi, was sent back to South Africa to manage the Phoenix Ashram that Bapu had established in South Africa. And so my grandfather married my grandmother and took her over there, and their children were born over there, and they raised the family on the ashram while they were looking after and managing the ashram. And so my father Arun grew up in his childhood in South Africa. They used to come to visit Ba and Bapu many a times, but they lived in South Africa. A South Africa that was very racist, where race prejudices were very rampant. And when my father was a teenager, he suffered the abuse and he was bullied by both groups. He was beaten up by the whites because he was brown and by the native Africans because he wasn't dark enough. And he was like a man in the middle, boy in the middle, and that filled him with rage. And he wanted to retaliate. So he went and invested in some weights and he started pumping iron to build up his muscles. And he started taking lessons in boxing so that the next time somebody bullied him and beat him up, he could retaliate and respond. And when my grandparents saw this, they were a bit anxious about it. And so they decided to send my father to live with Bapu at Sevagram in Varda. And they wrote to Bapu that this is what is happening with Arun, and we are very afraid that he might do something wrong in his anger. And so my father started living with his grandfather at Sevagram. And one day when there was a storm raging in Sevagram, Bapu took my father outside and he said, witness what is happening and describe it to me. And just then, as they were watching and talking to one another, there was a bolt of lightning that fell on the ground and fell on a tree in the vicinity of the ashram. And in an instant, the tree was burned to ashes and destroyed. So Bapu asked my father to describe what was happening, and my father described everything. He said there's an electric storm in the sky and that is causing the thunder and lightning. So Bapu asked my father, he said, Arun, what is lightning? And my father said it is a charge of electricity. And so Bapu then went into his hut and brought out a torchlight. And he gave it to my father and he said, Arun, can you switch it on? And when my father switched on the torchlight, there was light coming out of the torch. And he said, Arun, how did this happen? So my father said that there's electricity in the dry cells in the torch. And when I switch it on, that electricity converts to light and I have light to see. Then Bapu told him, he said, look, you saw the bolt of lightning. That was electricity too. And you saw the ray of light from the torch. That is electricity too. And my father said, yes, both are the same. They're both electricity. But then Bapu gave him a lesson. He said, the bolt of lightning had the ability to be productive also, but it destroyed. Its power was used to destroy. So it fell on a tree and destroyed that tree. And in that process, it also destroyed itself because lightning, when it falls, can never go back into heaven and remain as lightning. It gets consumed, it gets used, it's gone. So the object it falls on is destroyed as well as itself is destroyed. But electricity that is packed inside the cells, the dry cells, will continue to give us light whenever utilized to their best ability. And he said, anger, you must understand, is like electricity. In itself, it is not wrong, it is not evil. But how you use that anger, how you react from that anger, is what makes it bad or good. If you use it as a bolt of lightning, you will not only destroy the object on which your anger is focused, but you will also destroy yourself, because with every violent outburst, you yourself will deteriorate into a worse human being. And so it destroys both. But if you utilize that anger to energize yourself, to work against the situation that gives you that anger, to solve that situation, turn it good, fight against that situation, then anger will become like the electricity in the dry cell and will empower you to change the situation, make a difference. And in the end, he told Gandhi, Bapu told my father, he said, anger is like an acid. If you keep it contained within yourself and let it boil over, it will eventually destroy you also. But in a chemical reaction, acid is used to be productive also. So we must, it is how we use these things that make them good or bad. So thank you very much, children, for giving me this opportunity to speak to you and share some of my thoughts. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a very accomplished academician also. So I speak from what I believe is right. And so thank you for honoring me with this privilege. Thanks to the teachers and the staff of PODAR and all you children from PODAR. In my childhood, PODAR was the other very prestigious school in my suburb. It had three mediums of instruction, Hindi, Marathi and Gujarati. And many of my friends used to study there. So I am very familiar with PODAR, the old avatar of PODAR. And I am very happy to see that so many of you are benefiting from that tradition of education that PODAR enshrines it. So thank you very much, and it's over to you, the moderators and the managers of this event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Gandhi. Now, we shall move on to an enlightening talk and a question-answer session.
So are students going to ask the questions verbally,
Yes,
or is it on the chat?
So when they want to ask a question, they're requested to click on the participant tab and further click on the raise hand tab. This will allow you to ask a question, and we will know you have a question.
I don't mind if the children or the staff asks it directly to me also. So I leave it to you how you want to manage it.
So they will ask the questions directly. They will raise their hands, and the two moderators will decide who will ask the questions.
You know, children, if you don't ask me questions, I will believe that you didn't like my talk. So just for my sake, ask me questions, please.
Yeah, there is Shinika Vinayak raising a hand there.
Sure. You'll have to unmute yourself before you can ask me the question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
My question is anger good or bad, or is it important for us?
Well, I believe that anger in itself is not good or bad. How you utilize it makes it good or bad. So it all depends on us. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So it all depends on us how we respond to that anger. That makes it good or bad. It is in itself, nothing is good or bad. Bapu believed that every individual had some good in them and some evil in them. And that's why even to people like Adolf Hitler. When Bapu wrote letters to them, he wrote to address them as my dear friend Hitler. And even to Churchill, he called him my dear friend. He never said, "You're my enemy, so I'm going to be disrespectful to you." Because he believed that it was his duty to awaken the goodness in that person. And if he was able to awaken the goodness, then the goodness would dominate and the evilness would be suppressed. And then we would have a good person. And anger is also like that. If you use it productively, it's good. If you use it destructively, it's bad.
Yeah. There's Bushra raising a hand, Tripura raising a hand. Yeah.
May
Go
I
ahead.
ask my question? All right.
Please go ahead.
Thank you so much for your talk, sir. First of all, I'd like to begin with that. But my question is, you spoke about materialism and Mahatma Gandhi's rejection of materialism. Do you think that the sense of materiality is distorting our cultural fabric? And how do you think our new realities, which are woven around the need to possess or produce in a way that alienates us from our work, will affect the future generations of India?
My God, that's a very astute question. As long as materialism matters, I believe that it is our duty. You know, today we talk about sustainability and being in harmony with the environment. And our materialistic pursuits are the greatest damagers of our environment and our nature. And so, if we are able to curb our instincts to possess, we would be much more we would end up living a much more sustainable lifestyle. And in doing that, if we become productive, then it enhances the life. It will never harm us. Even suppose if you were to produce things which you do not use for commercial gains, the satisfaction of producing something will do immensely good for your own self-esteem. So it can also work in that way. And when everybody becomes productive, then you become interdependent on each other for sharing that produce. And it creates a very healthy relationship and lifestyle also, which is much more sustainable.
Mr. Gandhi. I think he's on mute.
Sir, you're on mute.
He needs to be unmuted.
Gandhi,
Were you able to hear my reply or
no? The first part of your response.
Okay, I'll repeat. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what I was saying was that materialism is dangerous because it is infinite. We can never be satisfied with what we have. You know, even if you look at just phones, you buy a new phone, and from day one you're waiting for the upgrade to happen, and you're waiting when we'll get the latest model. Even if that phone is functional and satisfies your requirements, you, as soon as a new phone, a new model comes in, you want to possess that. And that is not a sustainable lifestyle. And so if we reduce our wants and needs, we will end up having a much sustainable lifestyle. And if we are productive in doing that, we may not use that produce as a commercial thing. Just the satisfaction of producing something. You know, you go into the kitchen and you cook some food, create a new dish. And it doesn't matter if it is delicious or it is not up to that standard. The satisfaction it gives that you were able to do something and produce something does a lot for your own self-esteem. And then collectively, if everybody was producing, we would have a much more healthy interaction and relationship with society, because we would be sustaining each other. We would be dependent on each other and we would help each other grow in that manner. So yes, materialism is unsustainable, and the way we become materialistic is absolutely unsustainable. Yes, who was next?
I was next.
Go ahead, Bushra. Go ahead and ask your question.
How did can
Calm down, calm down.
Can Gandhiji also inspire people abroad, not just in India?
Well, if you look at history, you will notice that he inspired movements for justice and equality in South Africa, in the US, and in many parts of the world, even after he was dead. And he continues to inspire people even today, where there is a battle for right against might. He still inspires people. When the Arab Springs happened in Egypt, when people gathered in Tahrir Square to fight against the oppressive regime of Hosni Mubarak, the first group of people who walked into Tahrir Square were carrying a huge poster of Gandhi. And it has happened in all other parts also, even in Bahrain when they protested in Pearl Square. The first bunch of protesters carried a big image of Gandhi over there also. So he continues to inspire people. As I said in the beginning, Gandhi is very difficult to be indifferent to. One has to react, one has to respond to it. So thank you, Bushra. I hope my answer satisfies you.
It completely satisfied me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Tahir, you can go next.
Okay, so my question to you would be that in Gandhiji's legacy, the principles that is preached, do you think that in today's time he is merely being used as a propaganda tool by politicians and others to, and when we see the news, when we see the stuff that is going around, we don't see the principles there, but we see the chants and everything that is being going on. So like, what do you think about that?
See, we must understand that we are a very culturally programmed people to perform rituals. Even our worship is confined to rituals. You know, when it is Ram Navami, you go and pray to Ram, and when it is Mahashivratri, you go and pray to Shiva. And that similar way, you pray to Christ, or you pray to Allah, or anybody. It's all ritualized, and we have given dates to them. You know, like we create all those global days of things, when those things become important for one day and then we forget about it. Gandhi has also been turned into that. And so not only politicians, but in our own practices, we only remember Gandhi at Gandhi Jayanti or his day of martyrdom. The rest of the days we are indifferent to Gandhi. Whereas Gandhi has to become a living ideology. In his lifetime, his ideology was living. But the principles intimidate us, because then we cannot enjoy life the way we have come to expect that. 1 minute. I'm just answering somebody, then I'll take your
Guys, just stay on mute.
So it's very easy to ritualize somebody and pay lip service of worship. It's very difficult to adopt the principles and live the lifestyle like that. And that's why we always take the easy way out. You know, like when you're hungry, the best snack is Maggi noodles, because it's ready in 2 minutes. And so it's popular with everyone. And that is what we have done to ideologies also. We've turned them into instant noodles to just quench our hunger momentarily, not do anything for the nutrition, not to give us any nutrients for our body's needs, just to quench hunger. And that is what we've done to every object of worship that we have worshipped. Yes. The next question. Ambika? You'll have to unmute yourself, Ambika. Unmute yourself. I can't hear you because you're muted.
Yeah. How did Gandhi ji control his anger when the British came?
I'll give you an example of the time when he was in South Africa. He was subjected to a lot of racial insults in South Africa. And when he was thrown out of the train at Pietermaritzburg, he spent the whole night sitting on the platform, pondering on his actions. And the first thing he thought was, why do I have to suffer all this? I have a home back in India where I can go and lead a comfortable life. I don't have to suffer these consequences. He was angry and he was willing to take an instant decision. But then he sat down and thought that I can go away, but there are so many hundreds of thousands of my fellow countrymen who are trapped with no option in South Africa, who have to bear with this injustice and this insulting behavior all the time. And why don't I use this feeling of anger that I have to change the situation, bring justice for myself and my people? And out of that, the revolution in South Africa was born, which eventually led to its becoming truly free. And so that is the way Gandhi used his anger. It wasn't as if he never became angry. There are situations which angered him, but he did not act in anger. He acted in wisdom. That is what is very important. So Ambika, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does.
Thank you.
Tejas, you can go next. Tejas, you can go next.
But can you hear me?
I can hear you, Tejas. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, that's because my camera doesn't seem to be working for some reason.
That's fine. You can ask your question. I can hear you.
All right. So I basically wanted to ask you, how far do you think a leader like Mahatma Gandhi, not Mahatma Gandhi himself, but a leader like him, would be impactful in harboring peace among today's leaders and communities? Like today we have some very extremist groups in the world. Like we have very conservative groups such as the Taliban. We have very extreme left-wing groups in India such as the Naxals. So how far would you think that he would be successful in harboring peace amongst them? And would his non-violent methods and his ideas of satyagraha be reciprocated by them?
Well, British were in no ways non-violent. They were the ones who perpetrated the massacre of Jallianwala Bagh on us. So there is no reason to believe that Gandhi succeeded just because the British were benevolent and civilized. If you look at the history of the freedom struggle, you will see how oppressive and brutal they were, even with satyagrahis. And so it doesn't give me any reason to believe that Gandhi was successful because his opponent was benevolent at that time. They were as violent, but he forced them to respond to him in a non-violent manner. And that is where he succeeded. So I believe that even today, when we see extremism being rampant in our society, and let's not just blame certain extremist groups for that. We have all become radicalized in our own way. We live with prejudices. We live with our suspicions of one another, and that is equally violent. Violence is not just of actions, violence is also of thought, of our prejudices. And human beings have a capacity of being passively violence much greater than actively violence. And active violence is like lightning. It destroys, but it destroys itself also over time. And so the extremist elements don't scare me or intimidate me. But it's our own apathy that scares me and intimidates me because we allow the situation to keep worsening. And peace is not the responsibility of a leader. Peace is the responsibility of every individual. If we believe in peace, if we believe in nonviolence, our life has to reflect that. Unless we adopt peace and nonviolence as way of life, it's not going to have an effect. So individually, we will have to become peaceful. We will have to become non-violent for it to have a collective, become a collective change agent. So let's not just look at leadership. Politicians, by nature, will be self-serving because to be successful, they have to serve themselves and pretend to be serving the people. But a politician never serves the people. They serve themselves because their objective is to gain power. And they can only gain power if they exploit the people who they pretend to serve. So learn this fact very, understand this fact that if you believe in peace and non-violence, it is your own responsibility, no one else's. So Tejas, that was my answer. I hope that satisfies you.
Mr. Mara, you can go next. Mr. Mara?
Thank you. Sorry, only the host has power to unmute, so that took me a second. I had a question. So one anecdote from your talk or speech was about you in school spinning cloth and then comparing the finished product with your friends and saying, oh, I spun more cloth than you or not. And I think...
I lost you. I lost your audio.
I think she got disconnected by mistake.
Oh, okay. We'll wait. But in the meantime, somebody else, if they have a question, they can ask it. And when she comes back or he comes back, they can ask their questions.
Sure, sure. Kiara, you can go next.
So I think like many people say that Gandhiji was very poor when he was a child. So if he was so poor, then how did he get a chance to go to England or South Africa?
He was not really very poor. He was from a middle class family because his father worked as the prime minister of a couple of princes in the Saurashtra region of Gujarat. So they were not extremely rich, but they were not extremely poor either. They were a middle class family which had limited means, but they had their means. And he was sent to Britain to study law by pawning the jewelry of his wife, Kastur, who came from an extremely rich family. And in South Africa, he went to work on a job. So his employer bore his expenses and paid him a salary. So that became possible for him. And in South Africa, he became a very successful lawyer before he became an activist. And so he also earned a lot of money. There was a British scholar who computed the earnings of Barrister Gandhi in South Africa, and a few years back that study was published in which he computed that if he had not become a leader and an activist, the amount of money he would have ended up earning as a lawyer, practicing lawyer, he would have been one of the richest Indians if he had pursued that career. But I think he became richer than the richest Indian by virtue of what he practiced rather than what he earned.
And one more thing that when Gandhiji turned 19, I had researched yesterday and they were showing that his father had died. So then who was working to
Nobody.
like earning money?
Nobody was earning money when his father died, and so the family was in dire circumstances, and that's why they had to pawn the jewelry of Kastur to finance the studies of Mohandas.
So Gandhiji's wife came from a rich family.
Very rich family. Her father was the richest businessman in that region, and he used to run a merchant operation, and his ships used to trade with faraway ports like Eden and East Africa. And he also had this system of issuing promissory notes so that merchants who were going on the international mercantile expeditions would carry his promissory notes, and his offices in the foreign ports would honor those promissory notes and give them money so that they had money to trade and do commerce in those areas. So he was a banker in a way also. And so he was a very, very rich, extremely rich person.
I think we have Tamara back here. So Tamara, would you like to continue your question?
Thank you. Sorry, I lost connection mid-question.
That's fine. Go ahead.
I was linking back to your anecdote about spinning cloth, and if anything lockdown has done, in my opinion, is blast holes in our corporate or capitalist economy and expose what jobs, per se, are redundant or simply put, non-productive. And we don't have a physical thing we can hold up and say, look, this is what I made. And more often than not, we found that a lot of jobs were completely unnecessary. And tying this into your trend of us going back into sustainable living, do you see society going back to more trade-based or agricultural jobs, things that have more output or physical output?
Well, we have been too obsessed by output because our greed is so much that we want more of everything, and that's why we only believe that the higher production is good for us, but mass production is not sustainable. It's showing up now, and that's where the global movement toward going local and living a localized life dependent on our own community and locality is gaining credence the world over. The entire organic industry is because of our need to be sustainable. And so it's going to go back. The problem is our education system has abandoned the empowerment. You know, Gandhi believed that education needed to cater to the three H's: the head, the heart, and the hand. It had to empower the mind, it had to enrich the heart, and it had to strengthen the hands with a skill or a trade or a craft. But today, if you look at the education system, it all revolves around enslavement of the mind. It does not appeal to the heart because children are forced and intimidated by the system of examinations. And the hands are becoming useless because I see in modern schools, and it worries me, that children are even losing the ability to write because their entire education is being done on tablets and on computers all the time. And in my time, we used to actually have a class of handwriting and cursive writing. And it was done so that we would realize the ability of the hand and the creativity of the hand. And it empowered us with so much, even today. Of course, I'm an old 4G, so I do all those things. But I make notes on a notebook. I write it down instead of using the notepad. And my children make fun of me. They said, "Dad, you have a notepad on your phone. Why are you writing in a scrapbook?" And I said, "No, I grew up that way. And I want to remember that my hands still have the ability to hold a pen and form alphabets with them." But look at what is happening in today's education system. Parents also want to know whether the education in schools is being conducted on iPads or on computers or by pencils and books. I think we need to go back to that system so that hands do not forget the inherent skill that they were meant to practice. Because we don't know when that skill will come in handy. Technology is man-made, and like all man-made things, it is likely to collapse one fine day. At that time, we should not be handicapped. If our hands are also skilled, we will be able to become self-reliant and self-sufficient. Otherwise, we will only live a parasitic life. And so I believe that that is what sustainability is all about. It is individual enterprise and individual ability. Mass production will always have its place because we need to cater to a mass of population, but it will never ever be sustainable. It will only be handicrafts and cottage industries that will be sustainable.
Thank you.
Rahil, you can go next.
Oh, yes, sir. So my question is, any story that Gandhiji regretted? And if yes, then how did he overcome it?
Well, if we look at an example from his childhood, Mohan was a very timid child. He was almost cowardly. He used to be scared of everything, any given thing. Darkness scared and intimidated him. Insects scared him. Reptiles scared him. Ghosts scared him. He used to believe in ghosts and spirits and things. And so the daily ritual in his house was when he was growing up in Porbandar and in Rajkot, there was no electricity in the homes. And so every evening they had to light lamps in every room for there to be some illumination. And so somebody had to go with a lamp or a candle and light those lamps. And his elder brothers had this sport. They would force Mohan to go into the dark rooms to light the lamps. And on many occasions, what they would do is, as soon as Mohan went inside the dark room, they would blow out the lamp he was holding and then they would lock him into the dark room. And Mohan would be terrified of darkness and he would scream and shout and beg to be let out and become hysterical. And this became a daily ritual. The entire neighborhood knew that as soon as darkness happened, Mohan was going to become hysterical. And it was very traumatic to him, but for some people it was sport. They were enjoying it. And when it happened too much, Mohan's governess, Rambha, his Dai, she used to take care of Mohan, so she would rush and reprimand the elder brothers and then free Mohan from that captivity. And she would always console him and explain to him and try to make him overcome his fright. And she saw that Mohan was not overcoming his timidity and his scare, cowardly nature. So finally she asked him, because Mohan had also seen that his mother was very spiritual. And she used to practice a lot of penance for God. And so his mother had taught him about the presence of God, the God being omnipresent everywhere. And so Rambha asked him, he said, why do you get scared when you believe that God is everywhere? Even if you are in a dark room, God is there. Why should you feel alone and be scared by him? And Mohan said, but I can't see God. I can't hear him. I can't feel him. So how am I assured that he is there with me? And that is what scares me, that everybody has forsaken me and I'm all alone and I'm feeling oppressed by the darkness. It intimidates me. So Rambha said, why don't you loudly take the name of God when you feel intimidated or scared or a situation becomes overpowering. And there was a psychological thing in that also, that if Mohan started chanting the name of God, it would psychologically make him believe that he was not alone. His mind would be distracted from that oppressive fear that it was trapped by. And Mohan slowly discovered that yes, taking the name of Rama was helping him overcome his fear. And that became his mantra throughout his life. Even in his later part, he believed, he didn't even believe in nature cure. He believed that Ramanama was his medicine also. In his last days, when he was suffering from certain afflictions, he refused to take medicine also. He said, I believe in Ramanama, and if I believe in Ramanama, then I will be cured by that Ramanama. But remember one thing, when he said that his belief was in Ramanama, it was not in the identity of Rama as a Hindu god only. It was in the spiritual divinity of that identity that he believed, and so he equally revered Jesus and Mahavir and Buddha and Allah, because he had realized that the names were given by us, the identities were given by us, the differences were created by us, but the spirit whom we worship was all universally one. So even when he took Ramanama, it wasn't just merely confining himself to Hindu divinity. He was spiritual, and his Ramanama encompassed Allah and Jesus and everybody. And that is where one of his prayers was, Ishwar Allah Tere Naam, Sabko Sannati De Bhagwan. That although we call you by different names, you are one. And please give that wisdom to everyone. This was the gist of his belief and ideology. And this is how he overcame which were his adversities and became successively kept becoming better. And that is what we all can also do. Yes, Kabir, you have a question? Unmute yourself, Kabir. Please, yeah, Kabir, go ahead.
So I had one question. In today's time, there's a lot of technology coming up, and many people, most of the people are not following Gandhiji's principles. So how do you think in today's time can people follow those principles?
See, Kabir, if you look at how technology is developing, you will realize that we today are in pursuit of technology which replaces human ability. All the technology, and in the coming ages when artificial intelligence develops to a certain extent, it's so scary because it might even replace our intellect with artificial intelligence and make us completely redundant. And so that is the danger of technology. But Bapu also believed in technology that empowered human beings, that enhanced the human being's ability to achieve things. But technology to be sustainable and be productive for beneficial for humans, has also to be empowering human beings, not replacing them. So that is the difference between useful technology and dangerous technology.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
I had one more question.
Let's see if anybody else has questions. If they don't, then you can ask your question.
Yes, you can go ahead.
What question would you ask Mahatma Gandhi if he could answer?
Well, Bapu claimed that, if he was true to his belief, then he would be speaking from beyond his funeral pyre also. And I believe that, as Bapu believed that in time of adversities, there was a very faint inner voice where his soul used to talk to him. I believe in that also, and I believe that if we are honest and truthful, our soul also substitutes for Gandhi and will speak to us. And so we can question that and get our own answers. But if there was this hypothetical question of a situation of me being able to ask Bapu a question, I would say, Bapu, why couldn't you remain my own great-grandfather? Why did you have to become the father of the nation, where I have to share you with everybody? So it would have been a selfish request to Gandhi.
how have his beliefs or philosophies like stayed alive according to you, and how do you think we can keep them alive in the future as well?
Well, the principles on which Gandhi created his way of life and his ideology were not his invention. They were not his discoveries either. They were age-old values on which civilization itself was built. And so I believe that that is what has made them eternal. That is why they have sustained over time, because truth, love, unity, respect, and relationships are all values on which we have built our civilizations. And they are as old as the mountains and the rivers. And that is why they have outlived the lifespan of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi also. And that is why they will be eternal, because they are not bound to an individual. The individual only utilized them to develop his practices and his way of life. And that's what we all can do in our lives also. You know, I'm very sorry to say that, but I might have to ask for a halt because I have another engagement coming up in half an hour. And so maybe in the next 10 minutes, we'll have to wind up. If you have questions in the next 10 minutes, or if you have a program after which has to be done, then I request that we do that, because unfortunately today is a very busy day for me, and immediately after we end this program, I'll have to sign up on another webinar. So I'm very sorry to rush you like this.
I think so. We'll just have the vote of
Please.
thanks. We'll have the vote of thanks from Mr. Kaiser, head of school. And if they have any questions, we can always send it to you on that.
Please do that. Please, you can send me the questions on my email.
Yeah,
I'll
early
attempt
morning
to
on
answer.
Messenger to you. Okay,
Sure,
thank
definitely, yes.
Mr. Kaiser?
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Tushar Gandhi, and thank you for coming in. Hope I can be heard.
I hear you loud and clear, sir.
Okay, thank you for coming in, and I think this time uh, you've touched upon a whole lot of issues and brought Gandhiji alive, and that's very interesting, and a lot of things which we picked up, which is very inspiring. The inspiring life of Gandhiji, the idea of uniqueness and to cultivate that difference, the attitude which you need to develop. And in that little exercise of charkha weaving over there, you also touched upon time, and you know how to productively use time, and time being the most precious thing during this lockdown, where you think you have the time and use that time to bring about the idea of sustainability, to think in terms of Gandhiji from the spiritual side, from the educational arena, from the significance of ideas and philosophical bent of not tolerance being dangerous and talking about acceptance. I think we were very enriched because in such a short time you kind of covered so many areas and really brought the mosaic, the whole thing together. Thank you very much for telling us that its collective responsibility perhaps begins from individual responsibility, which we can take, and that finally Gandhiji was an idea, and it was not just a person, it was an idea, and it's eternal, and it just reaches upon the fact that we must walk our talk. Thank you for reminding us at this point of time that to walk our talk is to actually be a Gandhi. And thank you so much. And thank you for really taking out time. Time is very precious. That's the most lovely gift you can give anybody, is time. Thank you for that love and for that warmth which you displayed in your talk. it will certainly has touched all our chords in our hearts, and we are really, really grateful that you're here. We also want to thank Masha for having connected us, and all the people at the background for bringing this alive. And
Marsha has been very persistent in pursuing.
and you know why it does also touch our chords is also the fact that our organization, which was started in 1927 by Seth Anandi Lal Podar, was an eminent Mumbai-based businessman who started and founded the Podar group of schools. And Gandhiji, the father of nation, was the first president of the Anandibai Podar Trust. So it does have a legacy and the idea. And thank you for actually taking that little connect forward. Communicate, we all do, but connect is different. So thank you for connecting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. So now we have the national anthem and the school song that's gonna play.
School song first, okay, and then the national anthem.
Yeah.
Please stand up. You need to be upstanding.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Gandhi. Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Goodbye.